Alrighty, can everyone see that now? Hopefully. All right, hi.
Good, yeah.
Yeah, all right, good. My name is Lana. I am a psychologist and I'm also an author. I released a book last year called The Slow Life Project, and here to talk to you tonight about slow living in general, as well as my take on slow living, which is all about the mindset side. So no surprises there. I'm a psychologist. I did also, when I can figure out how to get to my next slide. All right, that could be a bit slow. When we did want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm on, which is the Jugara and Turrbal people as well, acknowledge their elders, past, present, and emerging, and also acknowledge that the sovereignty was never ceded. All right, so a little bit about me as a person. I'm originally from Canberra and I moved to Brisbane when I was about 20 with the mistaken idea that it was on the coast, only to drive east to the mudflats and mangroves of Moreton Bay, and was a bit disappointed, but loved the weather and started going to uni here, and so I've been here ever since. So I studied psychology at uni and have practiced as a psychologist, first for government, but then I started my own business. And it was through starting to work with clients that I ended up releasing my first book, which is just there in the top right of the screen, How to Stop Worrying and Start Sleeping. And that was basically came out of my practice with the clients that I had at that time. A lot of people had insomnia. A lot of people still do have insomnia. I think 1 in 3 adults suffers from it at the moment. So if you're not one of those 1 in 3, count yourself very lucky. And I really enjoyed that process of writing the book. I'm quite a creative person. And so I did that. And then when my kids were a bit bigger and they went to school, I started my own business, which was called Sage and Sound. That's the little owl icon in the bottom left of that screen. And I started it because by that point, I realized where my passion lay, and that was in combining psychological techniques with personal development strategies. So I was really interested in the sort of nexus between those two things, where things that we know from a psychological perspective, we know clinically, can actually benefit people who are looking to really maximize the enjoyment and satisfaction, confidence, joy that they're getting out of their lives. So I built that business on that principle, kept working with my clients, and give me a few years, I've then written another book where I've put those concepts just into written form. I just sort of distilled it down into, okay, you know what? I think these are the basic things that psychology has to share with the general population that can really help people to enjoy their lives. And so that's some of the stuff that I'm going to be sharing with you guys today. Outside of work and loving sort of creative projects, I totally love the beach. So I eventually found Stradbroke Island instead of being able to drive east. You just got to drive east and then get on a ferry. And so me and my family spend a fair bit of time there. And I do like to sort of, have fun and enjoy life as well. So that last little picture of me is one of the bars on Stratty. Alrighty, so I did want to cover today a few different kinds of slow living, so give a quick overview as to what that means, and then talk to you guys a bit more in detail about slow mindset, which is my particular contribution to slow living that's encapsulated in the Slow Life Project, which is a book. It's also a podcast and probably eventually be a course, and give you guys some ideas that hopefully you can use to increase the amount of confidence, joy, and satisfaction you're getting from your own life. All right. So slow living, what does it mean? lots of people have different definitions. And I suppose if you talk to people about who identify with slow living about what it meant to them, you would get many, many different interpretations. But I think a really good kind of general summary is that slow living, no matter what area of your life you're practicing it in, is going to be about making intentional choices based on things that you value, that are important to you. They tend to be things that give you a greater sense of satisfaction, but they also tend to be lifestyles that are a bit more challenging. I think slow living is essentially an antidote to what's easy and what's convenient, which is often exactly those two things. But what we lose is some satisfaction when we're living life just according to, well, what's the quickest thing that I can do? How do I just respond and get over this and get on to the next thing? So we slow down, making choices based on what's important to us, with the idea that it's going to be a more satisfying life, even though it's going to be a bit harder, a bit more challenging along the way. And because you're slowing down and because you're having a think about those things that are important to you, there tends to be fewer things in your life as a result. But again, we're sort of saying the trade-off of that is that the things that are in your life are really satisfying to you. So it's worth it. Just cut out the stuff that's not working, basically. Slow living, essentially the movement in and of itself, it's attributed to being started in Rome when McDonald's tried to move into that city. And the people of Rome and Italy, who had a real culture, all the aspects of food as well. So they weren't just sort of protesting the fact that McDonald's is fast food. There was a lot of their values tied up in the way that they did food. So you can think about, the difference between a little local family-run restaurant and McDonald's goes far beyond the food they're serving. There is a lot more creativity that gets experienced when you go to somebody's little restaurant that's just their own family run one. They will do things differently from the restaurant down the street, that they'll do it differently from the restaurant down from them. Whereas with something like with McDonald's, it's very homogenous. There's no creativity in it. There's a lot more connection to nature. In Italy, there's a fair bit of seasonal kind of eating, and that's obviously in opposition to something like fast food, where everything is meant to be the same and it's always available all the time. So it's sort of respecting that connection to nature was another value that was in there in the slow food movement. And a lot about connecting to family and connecting to other people. So in that Italian culture, that's also a really big part of how you connect with family. It's all around food, and it's about the meal being really enjoyable, even if it's going to take longer, as opposed to it just being quick and fast and done. So I think that really sums up quite nicely the sort of parallels between what it means to live in a slow way versus what it means to just pick the thing that's quick, cheap, easy, convenient. And obviously Food Connect in and of themselves are really wonderful ambassadors for this idea, because they built their business on values that are important to them. They choose suppliers that are local and that are respecting the land, that have that connection to nature. So that's where it's sort of widely agreed to have started. I mean, obviously it started hundreds of years ago before industrialization and tech, but once those things came along, food was the first area where we started to see the slow movement take off. Slow fashion is another one that has been rising in popularity in recent years. And that's because the fashion industry is widely acknowledged to be pretty harmful. Fast fashion is quite destructive to the environment, both in the amount of resources used to make the clothes, but also in the way that they process the materials as well. So making cotton is very water intensive. There's a lot of chemicals that often go into that process. So fashion, it also has as a value that connection to nature, and that taking care of the planet is something that's important to people who want to engage in that slow fashion movement. It can also be about choosing recycled pieces, choosing local to us designers, choosing, small designers, and that again would come back to that creativity value. So there's lots of different values that can be tied up in slow fashion, and certainly lots of companies now getting more and more on board in terms of things like using organic cotton. You've got to watch out for greenwashing. But if you want to engage with slow fashion, there's certainly lots of different values behind that, why you might be doing that, and lots of opportunities to do that in the world at the moment. Slow money. This is another more recent movement, and with slow money, we're really talking about coming back to that original value of what is important to me, and then that's where I want to direct my energy. Money is just another form of energy, and we all have to spend money at the moment in our society anyway, in order to live. So slowing down and paying attention to where does my money go and making choices based on your values is a huge area where you can really sort of expand into being able to, demonstrate to yourself and the world, like, this is what matters to me. There's definitely ethical super, or you can choose to invest in companies whose values align with yours. It might be about doing something like supporting a local band or dance troupe, or going to see, a local play, rather than putting your money into, going to the movies or buying something that's mass produced. Pretty much anything you could spend money on, you can stop, pause, and have a think about what that says is important to me in life. So this one's got a huge amount of potential. But the other thing to think about with slow money is that you want to be really careful not to overwhelm yourself. So when it's such a broad area, we do spend money, multiple times a day for most people. You don't want to get caught up in trying to do too much too fast and worrying about every single transaction that you make. You want to start small, and I'll talk more about these sorts of ideas in a minute. But you want to start small, and you want to focus on what you're getting right, rather than getting overwhelmed by the number of possible choices that are available to you. All right. And another area that's pretty new is the idea of slow work. So a lot of slow work principles actually kind of overlap with what's best for us productivity-wise. But what slow work means is it's still applying those same principles of slow living, thinking about what do I value, what's important to me, and then how do I put that in place in my workplace. And although we've been talking about, values like connecting to nature, creativity, sometimes with work, the focus is more on values that relate to our character. So it might be more thinking about things like, do I want to show up at work as an energetic person, or a relaxed person, or a disciplined person, or a friendly one? What qualities do I have that I really want to embody, and I want to bring more of that into my day? And then what does that mean for work? Like, how do I then work differently so that I feel satisfied at the end of my work day, so that I can prioritize in line with what's important to me, and I can make choices about what gets done, what doesn't get done, how long I spend doing it, so that I do feel that sense of satisfaction at the end of the day. So something that is like a productivity hack is, you only open your emails in the morning and the afternoon, like once for maybe an hour max, possibly less than that. And the idea behind that in terms of productivity is that you will work faster and you will automatically prioritize when you have less time available. So instead of other people's agenda just going ping, ping, ping at you randomly, you get to set your own agenda. You decide before you go in there, what's my top priority? Okay, it's about connecting with people. All right, I'm going to answer all the emails that involve connecting with people. Or if it's about focusing on a particular task, perhaps I'm only looking for the emails that align with that task. And when I do things like that, I get to feel like I am engaged as a focused person, or I am engaged as a friendly person. So, work is something we often can think we don't have a lot of control over, but we spend fair bit of our time there. And so understanding how do I show up at work in a way that aligns with my values is a really important part of your life to consider as well. All right, so my work. My work is all about the mindset that's going to best support you to live by the values that you choose. So the first part of that, it's knowing what your values are. And I guess people have very different backgrounds when it comes to their values. Some people are really clear on what theirs are, and some people really have no idea and have to think about it and figure it out before they're going to be able to, enact some slow life principles. Once you know what your values are, my idea is let's maximize the amount of time you can spend living by them, but also the amount of enjoyment you get from living by those values. We don't get 100% control over our time, money, and energy. We've got to share it with lots of other things and sometimes people. So we want to look at those things that I am doing. How do I really get to feel extra good about that, maximize the amount of satisfaction, joy that I'm getting from those activities? And then connected to that, but slightly different focus, is understanding the blocks to us showing up and living a life that is according to our values. The idea behind values are that they're principles that we support. We think that they're something that is really useful, a worthwhile way of living a life. So once you know your values and you know how great they are, what stops you? Why don't you just live them all the time? And I've broadly broken that into a few areas, which is, our emotions, our thoughts, and our bodies, pretty broad areas. But there's certainly psychological strategies that can help with each of those areas and minimize some of the blocks so that, again, you can show up more often as the person that you want to be and really maximize the enjoyment that you're getting out of your time on this planet. All right, different people have different ideas on what specifically values are. So just to really clarify what it means to me and with my work, I think of them as qualities that when you act on them, you're going to feel energized and you're going to feel really satisfied afterwards. So if you spent a day living by your values, you'd expect to look back and think, yeah, that was a really good day. I really, really liked that. And, if we extend that concept day on day on day on day, that when you got to the end of your life, you'd be able to say, yeah, I did all right with that. I'm happy with the choices that I made and the person that I was. It's also really important when we're thinking about what we value to think about, can I apply these values in different situations, in different places on the planet, with different amounts of money? And I think that's really important for a couple of reasons. And one is just that I like to include everyone or almost everyone. So I couldn't really buy into a philosophy that didn't involve a lot of inclusiveness in terms of its approach. But the other thing is that you don't know where your life's going to take you. So it's super important to have a think about, if my circumstances change, how can I still show up as the person that I want to be? So on this slide, I've put a few different values words that you could potentially use. It is certainly not an exhaustive list. There's lots of lists on the internet which can have, up to 500 words on them. And, as long as they meet those three criteria, you feel satisfied, you feel energized, and it's something that you could really do almost anywhere, anytime, then I'm calling it a values word. So have a read through there and see if anything on that stands out for you. I mean, I think with a food connect crowd, like a connection to nature is something that's likely to be important for people. But it's really good to think about the character values as well, because they're the ones that come into play when a lot of other stuff is out of our control. So how do I respond to situations? What kind of person do I want to be? It's a really important aspect of your focusing on your values as well. All right. So in terms of discovering your values, there's lots of different ways you can do it. You can just read through a big list like I showed you there. It's often a great place to start. There is certainly lots of different exercises that you can do, and some of that stuff's in my book. There's lots of different ways that you can kind of go through different parts of your life and figure out, okay, if I'm doing this with my time, or if these are the things that make me feel good, perhaps these are my values. And, I guess this picture to me also sort of embodies the fact that one activity can have a lot of different values underlying it. And that's why it's sort of important to figure out, well, what's the theme for me? So this woman's just come out of the surf, looks pretty happy, probably loves surfing, but surfing isn't a value. It's not something that you can necessarily do in almost any place on the planet. You definitely need to have a surfboard. You need to have a certain level of fitness, all that kind of stuff. So it's not a value, but there are things going on there that are values. So it could be that the reason this woman loves surfing is she loves connecting to nature. That could be the thing that really lights her up. And that's something that's a much more broad concept, where you could apply connecting to nature to a whole range of different circumstances. She might actually enjoy the peace and serenity, like sitting out the back of waves and just enjoying the silence and the quiet. And so it might be that peace is a value for her. And that would show up in very different ways. It might be to do with surfing. She might also meditate, that kind of thing. Conversely, it could be about the excitement. It could be that sitting out the back is kind of boring and she's just waiting for that one moment when she's on the wave, and the exhilaration and excitement that comes with that. And so if that was a value for her, then you'd expect her to pick up other activities that are exhilarating and exciting as well, that give her a buzz. So things like public speaking or jumping out of a plane. So it's hard to look at an activity in isolation and say, oh, this definitely means you value that. You've got to really look a little bit deeper and have a think about, oh, well, what else could be going on there? Maybe she values health. Surfing is just the greatest way she knows to get physical health. But once you've got your values, the idea is that you start living by them. So the first thing to think about in terms of maximizing enjoyment from values is to have a think about being mindful while you're engaged in the activity. So if we stick with the woman who is surfing, what she would want to be doing when she's out there in the surf is focusing her attention on the aspects of surfing that best align with the value that's important to her, the reason she's out there, basically. So if it's connecting to nature, it's about paying attention to that, like noticing how great it is to be sitting in the water and how it feels to have the sun shining on her back. But if it was more about the peace element, then to maximize enjoyment from that experience, it would be about relishing that peace, the absence of other people chatting or background noise or cars, and just really tuning into how peaceful she felt. You know, it might be about going more inside your body to pay attention to that sensation. And if it's more about the exhilaration and the excitement, then it's almost about being a little bit less mindful and going into the future and getting excited. You know, every wave that comes, oh, is this the one I'm going to be able to go on? Is this the one that's going to make me feel that way? And then when you're in it, really enjoying that moment and the amount of excitement that there is. If it's about health, focusing on how strong her body is as she paddles out the back and then as she's catching the waves. But with values, it's really important to keep in mind that we can go through and experience something that we do value and love it by paying full attention, or we can totally waste the opportunity by being caught up in our head. You know, it's also possible to sit in the ocean and worry about if your friend really likes you and what did they mean by that, or to be stressed about work and running a to-do list through your head. It's not recommended, but it's totally doable, you know, and that we do get caught up in life. But in terms of, you know, slowing down, paying attention, and really getting value out of the values you're living by, this idea of paying attention while you're living by them, great place to start. It also doesn't involve doing anything differently, which is another great place to start. It's all just about where you're directing your attention. And the second point for that is similar in that we want to lower our expectations on ourselves. So again, it's not about doing anything differently except for noticing where your attention goes. So with activities that we do, whether we like them or not, we become really habituated to it. It becomes normal to us. And it means that we stop noticing what's really going on. And that can be a real sad loss when you are doing lots of things, or maybe just a few, in line with your values, but because you just expect it from yourself, you don't really stop and pause and notice, hey, I'm doing that, and I don't have to be doing that. You know, we're all adults with free will, and if we wanted to, you could just choose to stay in bed, right? You don't even have to get out of bed in the morning. And I think that's kind of how far I want people to lower their expectations of themselves, that they don't have to be doing anything. So everything that you choose to do that does align with your values is something that you can celebrate, be mindful of, and let yourself feel good about it. You know, if you get out of bed, you talk to your family or your housemates, connecting with other people is important to you. Hey, you just did it, you know, but sometimes these little things just bypass us. And something I often see and people I work with from a clinical perspective is that they can have super high standards on themselves, you know, that they might be getting up and they're exercising and they're taking care of their family and they're going to work and they're working on themselves and they have hobbies and they check in with their friends. But because they just expect that from themselves, they're not allowing themselves to feel good about it. Well, that's just what you have to do. And with this, we really want to flip that. You don't have to do anything. So everything that you are doing, you can feel good about that choice. I mean, most people are good people at heart and they're doing the best they can. That includes you. So it's good to acknowledge that as much as you possibly can and look out for what are all those small ways that I've become so used to doing that I don't even realize, hey, I'm actually living by my values. I am actually, at least in part, living a life that I'm proud of and that I'm happy to be living. All right. So the third one is being able to praise yourself, which these are all sort of connected but slightly different. So we want to show up in the moment as mindful. We want to lower expectations so we're mindful as often as possible. And what I mean by praise is reflecting back after you've gone through the valued activity and just letting yourself feel good about it. as I said before, and, it's pretty obvious, we don't get to spend our whole lives living by our values. So when we are doing something that's more mundane or not what we choose to do, a great use of your mindset and your headspace is to just reflect back on the times that you have already lived by your values that day or that week, and just let yourself feel good about it. Some people do that in the way where they really talk to themselves, where they praise themselves. That was awesome. I'm so happy I did that. For other people, it's more of a feeling. They just feel that sense. And for some people, it's running that picture in their mind is going to be most effective. So you just need to play around with it a little bit, have a think about what's going to work best for you. But one way or another, this idea of reflecting positively on who we are, really, really good for our mindset and our confidence as well. And so it's really only once we've got those 3 pieces in place that you want to start looking at making some new choices that align with your values. You want to get as much benefit as possible from the life you're already living. It's the easiest way to do it. But the other thing is that you really want to build up your confidence and your belief in yourself as much as possible before you start making changes. A lot of people, when they get excited about a new idea, and slow living is no different, they want to make a lot of really big sweeping changes in their lives. But sweeping change is pretty hard to maintain anyway. And if you haven't done that groundwork to really build up your confidence and feel good and feel like you can do it, you make it that much harder as well. But once you've done some work around getting enjoyment from the values you're already living, then you can look at this is how you make new choices. And in my book, I go into, a bit more detail around what does it look like to set a goal from a values-led place? How do you kind of maximize success with that stuff? How do you use your values to make decisions? How do you use your values to build up your resilience? But the pre-work has to happen first. So if you're excited by these ideas and you want to do more with it, start with the ideas on those 3 slides first, and then look at what new choices you'd like to make. All right. So the other aspect of a slow mindset and a slow life project that's really important to me is that you have an understanding of how to minimize the blocks to being able to show up as that best self. So sometimes we set goals that we often have trouble reaching. And like I said before, I'd kind of made this broad sweeping generalization that it's either got to do with your motivation, how you're physically showing up, am I doing something or not doing it? Your emotional center is like fear or anger or sadness blocking me from taking action? Or is it related to my thoughts? Is the way that I'm talking to myself in my head the thing that means that I'm struggling to show up and be the person that I want to be? All right. So motivation, how we show up physically, there's certain things that we can do that are going to make it much easier to more fully embody a value that we have. So if we think about something like a value of patience, that's a character-based value, so great. It's theoretically something that we could use in almost any situation. But what does it mean to be more patient? I can set that as a goal, and it's going to be so hard to actually follow through on that goal. So motivational strategies are designed to make it easier to take action on a value that you're trying to live by more fully. And the first one, have a specific detailed plan. So this is so important because it means taking something like more patient and actually figuring out, what does that look like? How am I going to do that? And often in thinking about that, you then have to kind of lower your standards on yourself as well, and your expectations as to what is this detailed plan to be patient. So an example of something like that might be when I go to the supermarket and I choose the slowest line, I am going to breathe calmly and smile instead of getting frustrated and glaring at people and, getting angry that I chose the wrong line again, kind of thing. So having a specific plan, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to breathe, I'm going to smile. This is when I'm going to do it, when I'm in a supermarket, when I've chosen the line that I think is the longest. That in and of itself makes it so much more likely that you're going to be able to take action on your value. And you can see it, like when I said more patient, I just kind of get like a blank mind. But as soon as I'm thinking about a specific detailed plan, I can see that and I can kind of see myself in that scene and how that could work. Once you've got a plan, write it down. It's a simple thing that makes a huge difference. It makes it easier to remember. It tells your brain it's important when we write something down. And it also means that when you get to the supermarket and you start to get frustrated, you can pull out your plan on your phone or notebook or wherever you've written it and remind yourself what you're meant to be doing. So whenever we're starting to get stressed, one of the first things that goes offline is like our logical, rational mind, and also our ability to kind of remember things, and creative thought is affected as well. So having things written down means that when you're coming to the hard part, the actual doing things differently part, you've got a really clear idea of what you're meant to be doing. Starting small matters. It's very rare that we make changes that are too small. There's a ton of sort of motivational and psychological literature about how important it is to start small if you're trying to make changes. So the detailed plan, just in the supermarket, just when I am in the longest line, the things I have to do, that's the idea of like something that's starting small. I'm not saying I'm never going to lose my temper again. I'm not trying to do it at home when my kids are screaming at me, which would probably be like the worst time to try and do something like that. I'm going to start small. I'm in a social environment with strangers. It's going to be easiest to implement in that situation. And another great thing to focus on as well is how you'll feel after you make that particular change in your life. So one of the other reasons that change is hard for us is that it is more effort. And that is, true of the slow living principles in general as well. It's more effort often to do the thing that's right than it is just to do the thing that's easy, that's there, that's convenient, that's what we've always done. So this technique aims to get you to have a think about how it'll be afterwards, so that you're focused on the good feelings that are coming from the result of your actions rather than the effort of taking action. So that's just a few ideas from the motivational space around how, if you would like to live more fully by your values and embody some of those slow living principles, how you can set yourself up for success while you're doing that. The next area is our emotions. And like I said before, anger, fear, sadness, almost any feeling, contentment, rather than the effort of doing the right thing. So many of our emotional states can affect us being able to live by our values. And it can be really tricky because emotion is very motivating. Like I just said on the last slide, focusing on how you feel afterwards is a way of motivating us. Our feelings are more primal than our logical, rational brain. So they're likely to win if there's a battle between what I should do and how I'm feeling. The feelings tend to take over unless you have a process for it. And so then, like, this is why something like having emotions included in the Slow Life Project matters to me. If you've got a strategy for how do I cope when fear shows up, or anger, or whatever emotion it is, you know how to manage it. And that means you get to still take action on the thing that matters to you, even while the feelings are there. A lot of times we just wait for the feeling to go away. Doesn't really work. But what you can do, and there's a lot of different ways to process feelings, but just as a kind of general outline as to what works quite well with emotion, and you can use this when your emotions aren't too intense, but they're certainly affecting you, is to just roll through the steps that are on this slide. So the first one is label the feeling. Just actually take the time to notice what particular kind of bad am I feeling at the moment. That means, or it could be good, I'm not thinking that I'm going to take action. Even though I know this thing's important to me, I'm paused. What's that thing that's blocking me? So as soon as we label it, we know a bit more about what it is. We also contain it. So once we contain something, once we say, oh, it's fear, it's also not all these other things. It's not sadness. It's not anger. It's not contentment. And that in and of itself makes it more manageable. And it's the same thing for the intensity of your feelings as well, that once you give it a rating out of 10, so I'm 7 out of 10 afraid, there's 3 points where you're not afraid. So that helps to contain the feeling as well. Describing the physical sensations. This is tricky, but it helps you with the next point, which is stay in your body and out of your head. If you can just notice what's going on and talk to yourself about what's going on, you get to the end of knowing the unpleasant sensations that are in your body, and it stops your mind from saying unhelpful things like, this is hard, just give up, If you want your mind to be saying anything while you're processing feelings, it's focusing on the values, reminding yourself of why you're going to go through this experience. So if I'm going to feel more afraid when I start to take action, focusing on why that's worthwhile, it's worth feeling, this tightness in my chest, because I want to practice, the value of patience, or whatever value it is that you're working on. So emotions are a huge thing that affect our behavior. And of course, there's lots to say, but that's a little summary to give you something to think about next time you want to go take action on something that's important to you, but you find that you're stopping yourself because of how it feels when you do so. And the last area is thinking. It's another massive area. I spend a lot of my working life talking to people about the different ways that they talk to themselves and how we can kind of shift that, or what that means, and how it's affecting their values and how it's affecting their ability to show up. So yeah, it's just endless the amount of times things that we could talk about. So I tried to pick a few sort of really common thoughts that can show up that stop people from living by their values. The first one is one that I sort of spoke about before, that idea that I have to do it perfect. I have to take big actions or it's not going to count. I'm going to be a failure, And if you're thinking you have to get something 100% right or it's a failure, that is massively going to impede your action to show up as living by your values. You'll just get totally blocked. It becomes almost impossible to act because nothing's perfect. So how can I possibly take action? So that's an example of a thought that can really block people from living by their values. Another one is the idea that I can't cope, So if the value is, patience, like I talked before, the thought that could undo you there would be like, I just can't cope with this woman in front of me talking to the the cashier any longer. I can't cope with the frustration. I can't possibly breathe through this. Anything that's got that I can't attached to it, as soon as you tell yourself something like that, it does become really difficult to do it. Wondering about what if, another super common one. With what if, you focus on the worst possible outcome. If I just stay here in this line and I smile and I breathe through it, people are going to think I'm spineless and they'll walk all over me. It's probably like the worst possible thing that could happen in a situation like that. Could also be, I'll miss out, I'm going to be late, that kind of thing. But the what if thought, focusing on the worst that could happen if you live by your values, surprisingly enough, really stops you from showing up and living by your values. And self-criticism or worrying about other people rejecting us. Rejection's pretty core fear in terms of the human experience. So if we let our thinking wander to how will people view me if I show up as this person, or if we start to get really self-critical, like who am I to be a patient person, or who am I to take action on this environmental thing, I never went to uni, that kind of stuff. All those kinds of thoughts can really impede your actions as well. I've written down the bottom of the slide an antidote kind of thought to each of those general categories. So you can have a read of those. And if one of those categories really spoke to you, then you have an affirmation that you can start to use. So like I said, it's a huge area. And, a great starting point is just to be paying attention to, what do I tell myself? What kinds of thoughts do I have? And how do they then change the way that I'm feeling? And how do they change my actions? Do they support me living by my values more fully? Or do they take away from me living by my values? All right, so that brings us to the end of my presentation on slow living, and also my sort of approach to a slow life mindset. As I've mentioned a few times, I have a book with all these ideas in it. So if you've been really interested and want to know more, you can certainly hunt that book out. I have just started a podcast, which is super exciting, and that's going to be talking more about these ideas and getting guests on who are great at slow living and experts in things that I'm not expert in to share their wisdom as well. And you can always get in touch through socials if you want to have a chat as well. So I've got my email, Facebook and Instagram is where you'll find the Slow Life Project code. All right, so thank you so much for having me. If people have questions, I would love to hear them and answer them. Problem solving is one of my favorite things to do. So if you have any questions, pop them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and just ask.
Everyone's a little quiet. Sorry, I didn't catch what you were saying about the podcast, Lana. Is that live yet or coming soon?
Yeah, no, it literally went live last Friday. So super, super fresh.
Well, that's awesome. Congratulations. Is that on Spotify and stuff, or just your website at the moment?
Yeah, no. So that's on, what are the three main ones? There's Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts. So it's through all of those. So yeah, I think they cover the main ways that people listen to podcasts. Yeah.
If no one else has any questions for Lana, I might wrap up there soon. We will send the recording of this around hopefully tomorrow, but by the end of the week at the latest, along with all of the links to the podcast, the book, everything else you need.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, everyone.